All right, this is the follow up, and today we are following up on a series of live conversations I had on Georgia Space Chat entitled Broadway Uncovered Part 1 to 3. And my guest today on the follow up is the great Michael Cerveris. Michael, thank you so much for making yourself available and welcome to the follow up.
Thanks for asking me. I'm really happy to be here, George.
Oh, my pleasure. Absolutely. So, for those listening, for those watching, let me just give you and Michael a little bit of analysis of what we're talking about today, and then I would like for Michael to share his perspective, which is unique to him, being a Broadway and stage actor, movie actor, theater, film actor, television actor, and perhaps shed some light on this situation the way he sees it and the way only he can see it. Now, the Broadway Uncovered series, in the Broadway Uncovered series, I invited a number of bass players who are working in the musical theater world, who not only are working some of the biggest shows on Broadway, but also have the attribute of defying the stereotype that you have to be white and male in order to work as a musician in a musical theater setting. Now, I fully understand that these conversations are not easy, and I am very, very grateful to Michael for making himself available and to, uh, taking my call basically in order to shed some light on, a situation and how he sees the situation being on stage looking into a theater pit, into an orchestra pit. So, Michael, here's my question to you. Having, having done a lot of theater, you are known for, shows. You're on the one hand known for rock shows, but then on the other hand also known for very traditional shows or modern shows. Talking about Sondheim, talking about Tommy, stuff like that. Very often, these shows employ musicians that do fit that stereotype of white and male almost exclusively. My question to you right now, and to kind of get this started, is what does that feel like looking from the stage into the orchestra, seeing the ensemble? Is there an awareness of what the makeup of the ensemble, meaning the musical ensemble, is there awareness of what the makeup, what the racial makeup, gender makeup of that ensemble is?
Well, it's first of all, I so appreciate you asking me to be here and have these conversations because it's made me in anticipation of talking with you. It's made me really think about things and your bass chats in general, that I've watched in the past.
Thank you.
Um, it's given me an opportunity to examine my own prejudices and assumptions and expectations um, and that's a process that I hope a lot of us have been going through, especially this year or
Right.
in the past year in light of the George Floyd murder and Breonna Taylor and all of the protests and real urgent calls to re-examine, especially those of us who are white and especially male,
Mm-hmm.
to examine how much our privilege and our experience has led us to overlook things at best.
Right.
So, and it also, in an even broader way, has given me a chance to sort of look at simply the way actors and musicians who are engaged equally in making the success of a musical
Yeah.
um, often don't really recognize each other as shared partners in the enterprise.
Right.
Um, you ask about what it's like to look down into a pit and see an all white orchestra. Well, half the shows I've done, you can't even find the pit, and
Right.
I never even see the musicians half the
Right.
time.
Right.
And you kind of end up in your sort of separate tribes. You maybe see each other at company gatherings at Christmas time or something, but that's
Right.
that's almost sort of it. We had the beautiful experience in Fun Home of all
Right.
being on stage together,
Right.
which except for Clancy, who we, rightfully, kept in a room by himself.
Yes. He smells really bad.
Exactly. um, but Tommy, those guys in the basement were just kind of locked in a cell below the stage. I used to go down because I had time during that show, and I used to love going and sitting in the band room and just like listening to the band live underneath the stage. But so that's the first thing that occurred to me when you mentioned this, that that I spent way too much time kind of oblivious of the makeup of the orchestra, and not even really that aware of who I was working with. In Sweeney Todd, I actually was a proud member of 802 because we were our own orchestra in that case. So that was different as well. But to really get more at the heart of what you're asking, I have the experience of having walked into a Sitzprobe or seen orchestras when there was an open pit, or shows that I go to see where I can see the orchestra, and I think when I would see, it wouldn't seem strange at all when I would see an all whale. Maybe we should call it a whale orchestra.
It's a whale of an issue.
It's a whale of but when I would see an all white male orchestra, nothing about that seemed strange, despite the fact that the cast might be very mixed, but it still didn't seem strange of the orchestra, especially in a more traditional show, a Sondheim show or a Titanic or something. That wouldn't have seemed odd, and I wouldn't have really noticed. If there was a woman in the orchestra who wasn't playing, say, a string instrument or keyboard, that I might have clocked that, and noticed that. Certainly, if she was a bass player or a drummer or something. And if there was a Black person in the band, I suppose I would sort of notice it. I guess again, it would sort of depend. Interestingly, and I've been sort of trying to think about why this might be, depending on what instrument they played. There are certain instruments that seem more associated with white players than not. Not for any particular good reason, but just sort of the way it seems. But in all of these cases, I think I've noted it. It's kind of like landed on my brain. But I didn't spend much time thinking about it. I certainly didn't have a problem with it. But the fact that I didn't really take it in and consider what must it be like for this person to be in this position, and how much do they have to go through to find themselves in this position? How comfortable are they in this environment? And what is it to them? What's their experience of doing this? None of that really dawned on me. It never. When we met the Fun Home Band, I was just like, "Oh, George is playing bass," and I just didn't think about all of the things that it would mean for you to be there and be in that position. And so that that kind of in a way is a distancing sort of thing, because it puts us, you couldn't help but be aware of all of those factors and elements. And as much as we say we're all a family, and on Broadway shows, and we say we're all really tightly knit, there are a lot of places where we kind of overlook some fundamental things about each other. And I think that's part of what's been going on in the Broadway community in general at the moment, is we're recognizing, wow, we live so closely with the people that we work with on a musical, on a show. We see each other far more than we see our families or anybody else for the time doing the show. Um, and yet we're kind of big parts of our lives that don't fit in, the experience of what we're doing are just like left outside the room.
Yeah.
And a certain amount of that, I guess, has always been intentional. That idea of you leave your life outside the rehearsal room door when you come in.
Of course.
There's a lot of logic and value to that, and the kind of focus you need to have to do the kind of work we're doing requires that in some ways. But these times have really made me think. I wonder how good that actually is. I wonder if that fundamental philosophy is flawed in the first place and is partly responsible for why we can not see each other the way we need to, and that maybe that's a thing that needs to change in a deep way that would kind of start to open a lot of things in terms of race, gender, income disparity, differently abled people, everything,
No, we have. I mean, thank you for that. That's saying a mouthful right there. I mean, there is again, like, this is now 2021. Since the events of summer of 2020, where we had the George Floyd murder, the Breonna Taylor murder, Ahmaud Arbery murder. We had the situation with the lady at Central Park, which definitely, perhaps for many U.S. citizens, many Americans, period, very, very distinctly showed a particular set of behaviors, right? That Black people, that African Americans, that minorities, immigrants always had to deal with, right? For the first time, perhaps this, I don't want to generalize that, because myself, I haven't lived in this country long enough really to say that. But the one thing that and this is how it kind of ties into what we do, into our environment, in our community. The one thing that I am noticing, and again, this is based on, of course, in my case, years of dealing with this, in the general case of the events of last year, the one thing that it has brought to the forefront is, a sort of examination of our environment, right? And with that examination, now, if I were to take a look at, my situation, I'm a member of 802. You go into 802 building, into the club room, the big gathering room, and there are all these pictures, right, of symphony orchestras, of Broadway pits. There, all of them, the current shows, the current orchestras, etc., etc. And wouldn't you know it, there's maybe, and again, this is now a well-educated guess, because I haven't seen it in a minute, but there's maybe, if there are 5 Black people in those pictures, it's a lot, right? Just before, I believe before New Year's 2020 going into 21, there's one part of 802 that, or one, how should I put this? How should I call this? There's one thing that 802 has put out, which is called Save New York City Musicians, right? So a very, very good initiative. That's the word I was looking for, right? So Save New York City Musicians is an initiative that deals with, the outcome of the pandemic in regards to Broadway musicians, in regards to orchestra musicians, and generally, it's really supposed to deal with New York City musicians. So it couldn't be more broad, right? Yet on the Instagram page, wishing everyone a New Year's evening or New Year, 10 pictures, not a single African American in those pictures, not one. Never mind male, female, all white. There was one Asian dude. I'm like, okay, that's really, really bad. And as my partner said, that's disgusting. That's not, that's a thing, and this kind of ties in with what you're saying, that we need to perhaps come up with a way to fundamentally change the way we see our environment and our community, right?
Yeah.
This the I'll never forget, for as long as I live, doing Fun Home. Um, we had uh, there, there's definitely this situation where every now and then we had understudies come in, who weren't as familiar with the group, right, with the band.
Hmm.
Um, and if I'd see them in the hallway, I would probably not get on hello. And then at the end of the show, when there were the bows, I'd get this surprised look. Wait a second, you're not the janitor, it's and that is, or was that really you that I saw in the hallway? Like, because I can't really tell. It's dark down there, and you look kind of different because now you're all black and in all black, and
Right.
and I might have been wearing street clothes, in the hallway and whatnot.
Yeah.
So that is a situation that is very real, and that is sort of at the uh, I don't know. There's a lot of roots to this
Well,
particular behavior.
I think so much of it um, comes down uh, to exposure to what you see, and I think you what you're saying about this flyer that went out on New Year's is exactly the point. And it may be that it wasn't any conscious attempt. I wouldn't imagine it would be. It was just sort of like the majority, they would have to probably look, like you're saying, they would have to
Yeah,
look for specifically to find photos and make sure that they included photos
yeah,
of African American players and female players and all the rest. And that in their rush to be, trying to do this one good thing, it doesn't occur to them, oh, we need to make sure that we also
yeah,
are, giving visibility to our entire membership. Um, and that's what I was thinking a lot about this in anticipation of today, where this kind of comes from. And it's simply when you become accustomed to seeing a certain thing, you assume that's what it is.
right,
And because I grew up more a rock music fan than a theater, Broadway fan, I
right,
never expected to be in Broadway musicals. I never thought that's where my career was going to go.
right,
I played in bands from the time I was really young, and so um, I would see women and African American people playing in bands, not all the time, but there were, uh, you know, Gail Ann Dorsey would be playing with David Bowie, and
right.
it was striking at first, but then she was like, oh, she's Bowie's bass player, so
Yeah.
she's got to be cool, and
Oh yeah.
and and some of my favorite bands, Kim Deal and the Breeders, Kim
Right.
Gordon and Sonic Youth, uh, I saw a lot of women playing bass, so that didn't seem as strange to me
Right.
later. And and some of my favorite drummers and friends are people like Carla Azar, who played with Wendy and Lisa from Prince's band,
Of course.
um, and Janet Weiss, who plays in Slater Kinney's one of the hardest hitting drummers I've ever been on stage with. So, so I know that women can play,
Yeah.
every bit
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
hard as men.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Um, and in bands like Bad Brains and Living Color, those were early eye openers to the fact that punk rock doesn't have to just be white guys either.
Exactly.
Um, but but it but in all of those cases, seeing all of those people changed the way I before that thought about this stuff. And the only reason I thought about it differently before that was because I had never seen it before.
Right.
So I hear this style of music
Right.
with those kinds of faces. I assume that's the kind of faces that make it. And I guess there's a inherent suspicion that if the faces don't look like the faces that you're accustomed to hearing this music from, that you think, well, their experience, especially for genres like punk rock or bluegrass or and it works on the other side too. Like
Right.
I, I still have to confront my own prejudice when I see a soul band or a funk with a white bass player. I'm kind of like, how good can these guys be? You know, it's, I'm going to own that, you know? Um, and, and that goes to, and it goes against what I fight against myself all the time when I find resistance to me coming from, despite the fact that I grew up in West Virginia, but I'm more known for doing Broadway musical theater or film and television. So if I enter into a pure musical band realm, and especially like the Americana realm and stuff, there's an assumption that my experience can't be authentic to the kind of music that I'm interested in playing. And I think that's kind of what is subconsciously in the mind of a lot of people when they see somebody whose complexion or gender doesn't match the tradition that they're used to seeing. They assume that their life experience isn't the same as the authentic musicians of that genre. So, there's a suspicion that they, can't really play it from their soul because it's not in their life experience. Of course, you have no idea what that person's life experience is. And you're assuming that all the white male dudes in a bluegrass band, aren't from Connecticut prep schools or, or, and you know what? A lot of them are, yeah. Dylan didn't grow up in the Delta,
not
Jacob
really.
Zimmerman, but that's I think that's where a lot of the roots of this stuff is just this feeling like, I couldn't really know it because they don't look like the people that I've seen usually playing this kind of stuff. So it is so important, representation and visibility. And
well, that's exactly what the Broadway Uncovered panel conversation was all about. I mean, that was at least my attempt to shed some light on not only the fact that black people, female musicians have done these jobs for a very, very long time, but also that when included, these jobs are incredibly lucrative for the player, and then as a whole, these are the biggest shows. I mean, we're talking about Phantom of the Opera, we're talking about Lion King, Wicked, we're talking about the biggest shows that ever existed, okay, that make billions of dollars, where there is at least, and I don't want to give them a pass because, again, like with Lion King, Tom Barney even says so, like he's the only black dude in the orchestra of the Lion King. There's one other guy. So, but at least there is that, and for someone like me starting out, that was a huge deal because all of a sudden I saw Tom and I was like, okay, well, if he's here, then there's space for me.
Right. How much, because I know to some degree musicians are responsible for finding their own subs. So
we're totally
how much
responsible.
Totally responsible.
100%.
So on the one hand, I guess part of the challenge is to get our colleagues to make an effort to, but of course, I suppose, you're going to call people, or people that know of. And so then that kind of starts to say, well, maybe you just need to have more diversity in your, group of friends and
of
peers that
Oh yeah, absolutely. Notice it mirrors your community. It's the people that you call to sub, that are in your contacts, mirrors your community. Now, this actually brings up an interesting point because, speaking from my own experience, right? I'm a very light-skinned black man, right? And I have not lived my entire life in this country. So I got a strange accent, I'm very light-skinned, and yet at the same time I play black music, I live black life, and I am black life. So how does that, how do I kind of fit into these situations where, on the one hand, I did shows that were almost exclusively white, okay, and then on the other hand, I did shows that were almost exclusively black, meaning on stage and in the audience, right?
Hmm.
Um, so the interesting thing, and how I find, how I kind of make sense of all of that, is that, and this is talking to the community that you're around. I had to build my own community within the first 10 years of arriving in this country, right? And every immigrant will tell you the same story, that the first 10 years you just got to work and take every job that's offered. Okay,
Right.
you don't have the luxury of being selective. You don't have the luxury of really listening to your own wishes. You have to make it work somehow, right?
Right.
And therefore, all of a sudden, my contacts were extremely broad.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So this,
Yeah, because I mean that's true of anybody in the arts, really, but it's so, extra true of somebody from an immigrant
yeah,
community and somebody, from anywhere outside the kind of bubble of Broadway beginning, to
there you
do that.
go.
It's,
There you
it's
go.
it's so much more true. And so as a result, like you say, your community is so much more broad and varied,
Yeah, yeah. There's more. There's way more racial equity in my contacts than in the contacts of my white and or black peers.
Yeah.
Right. That's just out of the situation that I found myself, that I put myself in, because
Right.
I initiated this move.
Are there places like, say you're a white male musician and you want to broaden your community and broaden your pool of people? Are there places that you could go? Like if you're thinking,
I've
I want to try to find more, musicians of color or female,
oh
people.
yeah.
Are there
Oh
groups
yeah.
or lists
Oh
that,
yeah. This I mean this kind of speaks to, and I don't think that it is as such an institutionalized situation
right.
as it is really, um, a change in, perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
A change in attitude and perspective, and that, very often requires, okay, well, up until now, and sometimes it's as cut and dry as, up until now, I have looked down on this particular type of music, but guess what? From now on, I'm not looking down on this particular type of music anymore.
Right.
And I'm gonna listen to an artist, and I'm gonna start with one artist, right? And one album or one single or whatever it is, right? That up until now I would never have listened to. Whatever, I don't give a fuck what the style is, what the
Right.
genre, it doesn't matter, right? Um, and I think that with, uh, this seemingly small move is in reality huge. It
Mm-hmm.
really is. There's this, because all of a sudden, this entire universe, all of a sudden, you are basically from inside taking a sledgehammer to the bubble that you're in,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
With this seemingly small move of saying, I'm gonna open myself up to rap music, hip hop, to
Right.
funk. I'm gonna open myself up to brass shout music, because I'm a brass player, and so far all I've listened to was Glenn Miller and the big band highlights of
Right.
yesteryear. I'm gonna listen to
The New Orleans
brass,
brass band. Yeah.
New Orleans brass band, the brass shout music from North Jersey,
Mm-hmm.
which is extremely unique to the black community and extremely local, right? That
Mm-hmm.
you were not going to hear that anywhere else, right?
Right.
So it takes seemingly small step like that to start an avalanche of influences coming into your own psyche and into your own being, right? it
You know.
it it does change your perception of what's happening around you, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden, the I shouldn't say all of a sudden, because I'm trying to get away from that phrase. Nevertheless, you will start to, have interactions with black people that are not only at the bodega, giving
Right.
you the deodorant that you just bought,
Yeah.
this morning. Um,
The the irony, it just is occurring to me, is that what you were saying about, sort of crossing genres and looking outside of genres that you're used to. The fact is, there are very few genres and styles of popular music that aren't actually, whose origins don't come from the black community.
well, there are
Most
none.
of, yeah, exactly.
It doesn't
Like,
exist.
all the rock and roll played by white guys that I was listening to was, them having stolen or appropriated, or,
Yeah,
were honoring, black
yeah,
musicians that had
yeah,
come before them.
yeah.
And you said something interesting when we first started talking about today, about the assumption that black players don't read,
Oh
and
yeah,
that's part of why there's resistance in a lot of the more traditional uh,
yeah,
circles. Um, and that's a complicated thing, because there may be fewer black students in the training program, at Juilliard and classical training places, but that might not be because they don't want to be there. It's because it just doesn't seem to be like, what's the point if the opportunities afterwards aren't so great,
yeah,
or a similar kind of assumption that classical music isn't for them.
yeah, yeah.
I remember, uh, I remember when I was doing this concert at for American Songbook at Lincoln Center,
Right.
and a friend of mine told me that John Batiste, and this was before he had become, John Batiste and
Mm-hmm.
the Tonight Show, but he, I guess he had just graduated recently from Juilliard. I knew him as part of the Batiste family in New
Mm.
Orleans, and so I
Mm.
knew him as this, New Orleans jazz cat. And then I learned, to my surprise, and I was ashamed that I was surprised,
Mm.
that he also was a Juilliard trained pianist as well. And so I got him to play, some more classical stuff, and to be there to represent New Orleans on keyboard as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And having you play with me, and when we put our band together, I mean, for me, because I don't read, I can kind of marginally read for singing, but I really learn most, even musical vocal parts, by ear.
Right.
If you just hand me a sheet, I'm gonna be pretty lost and take me forever. But if you play it through for me once, I'll have it. So in my bands, I'm most of the time getting really skilled players like yourself and trying to lower them to my musical level. And and I have the reverse thing of always being, and it's because of my own inadequacies as a musician, and that is partly due to being the son of a classically trained music professor, my father, who taught in universities, and is the example of he's Juilliard trained, and
Right.
um and uh and so I think my insecurity always makes me a little resistant to
Mm.
people who are really well trained, because that it just makes me feel more inadequate and
Yeah,
more
yeah, yeah, yeah.
suspect. When it's, it shouldn't be that way either direction. You shouldn't,
Yeah.
you obviously shouldn't assume that somebody who doesn't read isn't going to be a brilliant musician, or that somebody who does read is,
Right.
and is going to be inflexible.
Right.
It's,
Right.
again, it's sort of seeing past all of our assumptions about
Yeah, yeah.
people,
I,
and, and making a world where somebody who has an interest in classical music, who, is African American and not of the resources to be able to sort of consider classical music or Broadway show music as their world, could happen across it, just like you're saying.
yeah. Yeah.
Somebody who only listens to rap music, listening to Rodgers and Hammerstein and going, I actually really dig this.
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah, yeah.
never would have thought of that before.
Yeah, yeah. No, I
So,
mean, here's the thing: like Jay-Z had a huge hit with that song from Annie. I mean,
Hmm.
that's a very very current, or I shouldn't say current, but that at least is a
Recent,
contemporary,
modern, yeah,
contemporary example of cross pollination, right?
yeah.
Couple things come to mind, and I'm not gonna keep you too long. I understand
No,
your
I
time
I
is
can I can do
valuable.
this all day.
Awesome. But when we did, like when we, as you said, one thing that I noticed, and I think this ties in with where you're coming from as a music aficionado and as a rock musician. When we did your album release, right? You had me in the band and you had Monica Davis in the band.
Hmm.
Um, and I thought that that was a brilliant move, right? And I you probably, I don't know whether you remember it or anything, but um, I don't know whether that was a conscious decision or not, and I don't need to know, to be honest. Nevertheless, I thought that that was a really really smart and really good move because it represented the time that we were in, right? If your album is, if I remember this correctly, you could typify it as Americana,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
It's got strong folk music influences, but it sort of also has acoustic rock music influences. There's a twinge of 70s that's just there,
Right.
and yet you have me on upright bass, and then you have this black woman on violin in the violin section, or I forgot how many
Yeah,
strings you
there are, I
had,
think there are
four,
four or five. Yeah,
something like
at
that.
least
So,
four. Yeah.
I thought that that was really a really really smart move, and again, perhaps not consciously, but it was just a smart move because it represented what life is, right? It
Well.
represented what life was at that point, at that time. It represented your community, your environment, right?
Hmm.
Um, here you are. These are the
Yeah.
musicians that I'm around usually. So these are the musicians that are going to do this gig with me.
Yeah.
I thought
That's
that that was really cool. That was really cool, and it kind of speaks exactly to this particular situation, especially especially when it comes to hiring practices, like extremely racist hiring practices that are still the norm. Where that are sort of based on stereotypes like black musicians can't read, women can't play, all of this. The other on one of the panel, the last panel that we had, that I had, the bass player Lynn Keller, who's a bass player from LA,
hmm.
longtime bass player with Diana Ross, who's this tiny lady, 5 foot something. I mean, if I'm next to her, I look like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Seriously, it's an enormous. But I've known her for a pretty long time now, and she coined something that resonated with me, and I said, like, all these stereotypes are extremely old and tired, and I thought that that really hits the nail on the head. Old
Yeah.
and tired, right?
Yeah.
um
And they're not serving us. They never
oh no.
did, but they're
Yeah.
really not now.
No, not not
Um,
not not at all. There's a lot of, there are certain, and coming back to your question of where to go, what to do, there are initiatives, in 802. There's what they call a diversity committee, which I think they should change the name to a racial equity committee. That would
mhm.
be more correct.
Correct. Yeah.
There are several, I hope I get this right, 501k, nonprofit organizations.
Yeah.
um, Muse comes to mind. There's Maestra for female musicians. Muse is for musicians of color, who definitely are trying to educate and kind of start the pipeline to what you were talking about in terms of, well, wait a second, we just don't have that many African American students at Juilliard because they don't see themselves represented in the work field, in the employment possibilities that come after Juilliard, right?
And they're not coming from communities necessarily who see that as a viable career path. I mean, any
Same,
there are,
same could be said for white communities, though.
yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
especially
A lot
when
of
it comes to the arts, you know.
yeah, and especially underserved
Oh yeah,
and
yeah,
financially strapped communities
yeah,
are not going to say, white or black,
yeah.
I want my kids to go into the arts
Right.
because not
It's
exactly necessarily a
it's gonna get tough.
easy
Yeah, there's
career. Yeah,
there's no doubt about that. So there are
but
these organizations, you know, and I wanted to shout them out. I do to a certain degree, you know, I try to put whatever my cloud, whatever my platform is behind them because I think it's important. But then on the other hand, I do believe that these conversations that we are having like right now, uh, it really takes uh, an effort like this, in my opinion, to change people's minds and perceptions. It's not something where, because let's just use Broadway as an example, right? In the last 30, 40 years, right, we've seen shifts of employment for New York City musicians, whereas it used to be studio work, you know, it used to be club dates, studio, nightclubs. Slowly the nightclubs kind of went away, or they're not union gigs anymore, so they don't offer any benefits, they don't offer
right.
any security. Um, Studio work pretty much changed, you know,
Well, yeah,
from
so much of it can be automated or electronically done, or people are doing it in their home studios and
there you
not
go.
hiring side people. And yeah,
There you go. There's still a lot of studio work to be had, but it's not happening in the big studios anymore. And you know, consequentially, big studios have folded, you know, have gone the way of histories, pretty
yeah,
much. Yet, the musicians who, for instance, did studio work, did the jingle work, as a group, you know, conscious or unconsciously, moved into theater work, right?
right.
And that was sort of late 80s, early 90s,
Hmm.
right? That's when
That became the sustenance
that
thing.
became all of a sudden. Again, there's all of a sudden there is that became the employment du jour, so to speak,
Hmm.
right? Um, and with that came a complete lack of representation, right? And
Right.
I don't wanna pinpoint that particular time period or situation as the root of all evil, because it isn't. And this is the US is one of the most racist countries on this planet, okay?
Yeah.
So you cannot it's not going to be from the late 80s into the 90s until
Right.
now.
Everything was fine until the late 80s.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, piece of cake. No. But that employment situation is real, right? And
Yeah.
to where we are now, where you know we have seemingly less black musicians on Broadway than ever before, right?
Right.
We have more women than black musicians.
Mm.
You know, not that that means anything, but at least it
Right.
shows that in terms of gender equality, there has been like a significant push to get white women into these jobs. Yet
Yeah.
black musicians, male or female, are still, you know, battling stereotypes of you're black, you gotta be a gospel musician,
Right.
and you don't read, right?
Right.
And you know, forget about playing that Sondheim piece or Fiddler, or even though Fiddler had a black lead violin player,
Mm.
one, right?
Right.
Um, so
Yeah.
the last incarnation of Fiddler, and
Yeah.
again, I'm
It's
just using those as examples, right?
yeah.
Of what still needs to be overcome, and it is a mountain. It is a
Yeah.
lot, right?
But it's going to be, it's going to be that mountain is going to be chipped away and eroded by, you know, on the small scale.
Well,
That's how it's going to happen because I don't, you know, I think it's good and important to be hammering away at the top of the heap and getting, producers and MDs
yeah,
and uh, fixers. So is that what the
contractors.
contractor guys? Yeah.
Although they could be fixes.
Yeah. Fixes in.
That is
Um,
really good.
um, but I mean, those people in those positions need to be aware and need to be
Yeah.
addressed, and have their feet held to the fire somewhat in terms of sort of doing some top down
Yeah.
reconfiguring. Um, but there's so much power and so much more kind of grassroots ability to change things uh, among those of us who actually do it and who are
Right.
actually there all the time. And part of it's stuff that we're talking about, like
Yeah.
expanding your arena of subs to include other people.
Yeah.
If you're putting a band together like me, I have
Yeah.
to say it didn't even dawn on me until we were talking about this now that I had sort of put together this kind of representational
Yeah.
uh, band. It was literally like, I need people who are really good musicians, who I know and like and feel you know collaborative and creative with, who read. And I
Right.
knew that you guys filled all those boxes, and you were around me. If at at that time I don't know if I had been in a show that had an all white male orchestra, I don't know if I would have thought to reach outside of that. I just would have reached to the people immediately around me. And if I didn't find players, to fill the positions there, I might have looked further afield, and you might have asked for other suggestions. Um, but certainly, and I'm really happy that that was just how it ended up, and it ended up that way in a very organic way. Like
Oh yeah.
what we're saying, that is what we should be moving towards, an environment where that's just kind of natural because you look at the people around you. But I also have to say that part of my broadening and deepening of my understanding of the community that I'm in as an American has been coming to New Orleans and having such a life here, because there's it's a very complicated racial landscape here in New Orleans, and it's simultaneously the most racist and least racist place I've lived in at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, and interestingly, in terms of like different genres of music, um, a thing that happened after Katrina, because so many musicians had to flee the city, and it took a long time for some, and some never made it back, and others, came back and were trying to gig right away. And there were lots of groups who were trying to play gigs, but like their drummer was now in Texas and couldn't get back, or their horn section was scattered all over the place. So guys who had only played like rockabilly or classic rock or whatever were suddenly joining trad jazz bands, or soul bands or funk bands, and vice versa. And so the musicians in this city began to, not just along color lines, but along stylistic lines, started playing together styles that they'd never played before, and suddenly discovered that they actually could play stuff that they had never thought of before.
Right.
So it really became a place where you see very mixed, and disparate makeups of bands. So I think, and I began seeing that a lot in, Cajun and in the audience as well, and Cajun music and jazz music and soul and rock and roll here. And so it made it even easier for me to think, and that record, among all the other things that it was, it also has a New Orleans kind of element infused in it. Yeah. So it seemed very natural for me to have a representative looking kind of band, but it wasn't ever part of, what I set out to do, to make a statement. Although now I think I would want to do that. I mean, my band that I'm playing with now, again, it's all white people. There's a female co-lead singer. But that's just because those are the guys that I met who, wanted to do this.
Of course.
But when we kind of expand to doing our Christmas shows and stuff, I am conscious of wanting to include, for my own sake, just because I think it makes the band more interesting if you have
Right.
people from different disciplines and different, lifestyles.
Yeah.
Um, but I am more aware of it consciously now than I was, and just in the same way that I think Will and Grace probably had as much to do with marriage equality as
Mm.
all of the, hammering away at the Congress people,
Right.
in terms of just changing society's idea of who the other is and
Yeah.
who is us. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I think in the same way, uh, we all have so many more opportunities and so much more possibility to just little by little make a world where these barriers aren't aren't observed and
Yeah.
or noticed and crossed easily.
Yeah. 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 No, most definitely. Most definitely. I mean, hence the conversation that we're having right now. Like
Yeah,
that is exactly, and for what it's worth, George's Space Chat is now 1,200 people strong.
that's
There is
amazing.
there's a YouTube channel that's linked to that. Like all of this information is available, right? And
Hmm.
and you know, of course, whether you make yourself available to it is a different story.
Right.
That's something. So there's a very significant sentiment, especially when it comes to white identity politics. And that sentiment is that it's not going to go away until white people realize that it's holding them back.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
not only that it's holding them back, but they are also the root of it, right? This is
Yeah.
not something that black people or minorities or immigrants or anybody else can fix as such, right?
Right.
This is something that white people have to fix. Um, this is to a certain degree, and that's why I'm also like so grateful to you for making yourself available, because this is not an easy thing to talk about, right? And this is not something that's on anybody's mind, really, white, black, or whoever.
Mhm.
Because also we're dealing with an incredible niche group of fringe society, so to speak.
Right.
I
Well, I
mean,
mean,
this
there's a
is
certain privilege inherent in just talking about working on Broadway.
yeah.
Like,
There you
a
go.
lot of people, who from every background who
Yeah.
would give their life to be able to be having to have this conversation.
Exactly. Yet at the same time, like just think about the enormity of what that means to the outside world, because the outside world is now this billion-dollar industry that Broadway represents, right?
Hmm.
And that
And it
industry is thousands of people who come to see shows,
and it
thousands
comes
of
with a
people,
responsibility.
you know that
Yeah.
that come and potentially take a look into the orchestra pit,
Hmm.
or see the musicians on stage. And all of a sudden, again, there's that word, or there's that saying again, which I'm trying to lose. Nevertheless, there they have uh, a group of musicians that represents a community that's more like an environment that's inclusive
Yeah.
rather than exclusive,
Well,
right?
that was the beautiful thing about Fun Home on every single level. I mean, so much of the core of what that show was giving representation
Yep.
to a group of people in the story
Yep.
who traditionally have never been able to see themselves on stage before. Butch lesbian
Right.
girls,
Right.
uh, as a protagonist and not a comedic
A
sidekick.
side player.
Yeah,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
and I
No, I
think
get
that
that.
informed so much of the whole community of that show. And Janine Tesori, who I'm sure had a large part in why the band looked like it did.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I also just pushed myself on too Clancy. That that
well,
was
yeah, and Clancy too. Yeah, that's true.
that was me just being a hard ass.
Sometimes that's what it takes, man. You got to
Exactly.
do what you got to do.
I was like, now what's going on? Do you have a gig for me or not?
Yeah, yeah. But I don't have people keep talking about, what's the world going to be like when we come out of this, and when do we get back to normal and stuff.
Mm.
And I have no fucking interest in being back to normal.
Yeah.
Is the more we stop and think,
Yeah.
the more what was normal and what we accepted as normal is, it's understandable that it was the way it was
Yeah.
before. And,
Yeah.
we didn't have our eyes as open as we should have in
Yeah.
so many different ways,
Yeah.
sexism,
Yeah.
racism, everything. But we do now,
Yeah.
and no excuse not to anymore. And
Yeah.
we can continue to right the wrongs of the past, but there's a lot of room to just start making a new future. And we have time right now
Yeah.
to think about it and
Yeah.
to plan for it, which is not something that the theater is generally good at.
Yeah.
It's kind of, it seems like, especially commercial theater is a very reactive place.
Yeah.
It's like, a societal trend will shift, and then 5 years later, Broadway will maybe try to catch up to it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so we, as the workers on the ground, have the chance to be doing things like having conversations like this, which is so valuable, I think, and taking it home and thinking about it, and thinking about your place in it, and thinking about what you can do the next time you are in a position to, influence something one way or another, or simply just, next time you're in a show and you see an African-American person walking in the hallway backstage, make sure you don't assume that they're the janitor. It can be that simple.
It would be it would help. I mean, for what it's worth, just to put that into perspective, it probably didn't help that I was
carrying a broom at the time.
Well, I was saying something similar. Like, I was in the theater with Lady Day before Fun Home.
Oh, right? Yeah, right. That's right.
So I was extremely friendly. Like I always said, this is my house, right? I'm walking around backstage like, this is my house, blah, 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 being loud and whatnot. And, I'm very friendly with the staff, with the theater staff, because they have already known me now for, however long Lady Day ran, So,
we used to make a joke that they would just set you up in the same place and just put different shows around you.
Exactly. So that probably didn't help, that added to the confusion of then, the lights go up and there I am, surrounded by a forest of bases, and I'm like, oh, wait a second, what are you doing there? This.
But that's another thing too, and it was the beautiful thing about Circle in the Square, because of the geography of that theater and it being in the round and the way you have to come through the lobby, go in and out and everything. We interacted so much more with the house staff and with the crew and with everybody else, so that we knew each other much better and much more than you generally get to. And that's another thing, why do we have these why do we perpetuate and give into these traditional divisions in labor between, there's the artistic people and the creative people, and then there's the staff people, and it takes every single person there for the experience to be what it's supposed to be. And it's, and on that level too, there's room for seeing all of each other completely.
No doubt. There's and perhaps we should leave it with that, but there is the division or there is the designation of the creatives,
right?
The creative heads of shows, right? I that always raised my eyebrow. Because the creative team, so to speak, never included the orchestra
or the actors. Actually, I mean, it's the creative team. Generally, when they say that, they mean writer, director, composer.
So it tells.
But if you've ever seen a house manager deal with an unruly patron, I mean, that's creativity.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
You know,
There's no doubt about
or
it.
you know, when the air conditioning is failing and somebody's got to figure out a way to cool off the theater. You know,
Yeah, yeah. Been
that gets
in
creative.
been in both of those situations. Yeah, we had people undressing on stage at Spring Awakening, and
Mm.
that was on Broadway. But then off Broadway, we had a AC system flatlining
Yeah,
at the Atlantic, which is this brick
yeah,
building, heat wave in New
yeah,
York City, and the AC system was just like, I'm done, I'm out, deuces, we're out, right?
yeah.
They had to figure it out. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of creativity, all of
Well,
that.
you remember we lost the board, the sound night,
There you
and
go.
you know, had to figure out how to do everything and the actors with absolutely no mics or PA,
Yeah.
yeah, or any of the bands, you know.
Needless to say, that was one of the shows that I didn't play.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Was it Ivan that night or something?
It was
It
Alan
was
Hewitt.
Alan.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Alan Hewitt. Yeah,
that's right. It was Alan. That's right. Yeah.
That's, like,
This is so mean of you to sabotage your
no,
sub that
that was really fucked up. I know. But the funny thing is that, like, you would not believe the phone calls and texts that I got, either during the show or after the show. Like, I don't know what to do.
What do I
What
do?
should
How do
I?
I
What? I felt so bad for the dude. I'm like,
lay it on the upright, man?
yeah,
That's all you got.
you know, go with it. Just go with it. Just
Yeah.
good times. Anyway, listen, Michael Cerveris, thank you so much for making yourself available again. And again, for taking my call and talking about this and sharing your perspective on this situation. I think it as I said now many times, it's an incredibly unique perspective that only you have, and then it's a very specific situation that maybe even due to its specificity mirrors what's happening on a larger scale in the country, et cetera, et cetera. So I cannot tell you how grateful I am. I really mean that. And, thank you so much again for being here today.
Well,
Means the
thank
world to
you. I
me.
mean, I know I still have so much to learn and so much to understand and to unlearn. And
Oh, yeah.
so, opportunities like this, you're giving me a chance to learn more and to think more. And, I really appreciate that.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, listen, take care. Stay safe out there. Stay sane. And hopefully we'll see each other, in the coming months.
I hope so.
All right.
I
You
really
take
do.
care.
Thanks, James.